Here's a story that was published several days ago on Politico by Adam Wren. Headline, Centrist Dem Group rails against leftist identity politics and purity tests. When several dozen Democratic political operatives and elected officials gathered at a Tony resort off the Potomac River last month, frustration boiled over at the left wing of their party. Democrats had become too obsessed with ideological purity tests and should push back against far-left staffers and groups that exert a disproportionate influence on policy and messaging, according to a document of takeaways from the gathering produced by the center-left group Third Way and obtained by Politico. The group of moderate Democratic consultants, campaign staffers, elected officials, and party leaders who gathered in Loudoun County, Virginia for a day-and-a-half retreat where they plotted their party's comeback, searched for why the party lost in November and what to do about it. Much of what they focused their ire on centered on the kind of identity politics that they believed lost them races up and down the ballot. And Politico also published the actual 5-page document that was produced by Third Way, and I want to go over a couple of things from it in a moment. But first, let's be clear about what this all is. Third Way is a group representing centrist and moderate Democrats. And their solution, after their big meeting, to make the Democratic Party more successful is to make it more moderate and more centrist. Shocking. This is kind of like if the owner of a grocery store put the manager of the meat counter in charge of finding out how to make the store more successful, and he came back with the recommendation to get rid of the produce section. This was not, they didn't take any polls, as far as I can tell. They didn't make any effort to actually engage with the electorate, with Democratic Party members, just in the general public, with people who voted and people who didn't vote. There was no effort to kind of take the temperature of the actual room as far as the Democratic base, or people who might be part of the Democratic base but aren't because they don't usually vote with it. This was just a bunch of centrists and moderates getting together and talking amongst themselves to figure out what was wrong. And surprise, surprise, they concluded that they're the ones who can fix it. Let's talk about this 5-page document that they produced. So here are some of the things that Third Way says are, in their minds, after they've discussed it with each other for a day and a half, they have figured out why the Democratic Party has problems connecting with the working class. Here are some of their ideas. There's an overemphasis on identity politics. They say many working class voters feel Democrats prioritize niche identity-based groups with overbroad unifying messages, making them feel excluded rather than included. There's the faculty lounge problem. Democrats are often viewed as judgmental, out of touch, and dismissive of those without elite education or progressive views. This makes the party seem disconnected from everyday people. Isn't it rich, by the way, that the people diagnosing this problem diagnosed it while they were at a day-and-a-half retreat at what is described in the Political article on the subject as a Tony resort? Failure to prioritize economic concerns. While voters struggle with jobs, wages, and inflation, Democrats are seen as more focused on cultural and social issues than on economic progress and opportunity. Weak messaging and communication. Now, this one I'll give them. This is absolutely true. The party's language is often vague, politically correct. Well, I don't think that's a problem so much. And overly intellectual, making it hard for working class voters to connect with Democratic policies because you know how fucking dumb working class voters are. You have to explain it to them like they're 3 years old. I do, in general, though, I do agree with that point, that Democratic messaging is not good. Fear of dissent within the party. Democrats are perceived as intolerant of internal debate, where questioning progressive orthodoxy results in backlash rather than open discussion. Candidates and operatives need to feel more comfortable just saying no to activist groups and unpalatable far-left ideas. What far-left ideas has the party said yes to recently? Seriously, like, what are they talking about? And also, what is this fear of dissent? Since when do the progressives and the far leftists run the party? What are these people talking about? It's people like this that run the party. Like they're saying, put us in charge. They're already in charge. Who are these far leftists and progressives that are so in charge of the Democratic Party that they're kicking people like this out or making people like this afraid to voice their concerns? Where is this happening? Here's another one. Attachment to unpopular institutions. Democrats are seen as defending elite institutions, academia, media, government bureaucracy, while being critical of institutions working class people value, churches, small business, police. They really can't get over that defund the police thing, can they? 7, allowing the far left to define the party. Activist groups and progressive staffers push unpopular cultural positions, making it seem like Democrats are more extreme than they actually are. Operatives and campaigns must remember that activist groups exist to promote their single issue and raise money around it, not to make Democrats electable. Now, I will give them this. There are certain activist groups and certain just sort of groups of activists, formal and informal, on the far left, on the more progressive side, that do absolutely fit that definition. There are absolutely groups of activists on the left, especially on the far left, who are way more interested in raising awareness and raising money on their specific issue than in making Democrats electable. That is 100% true. Now, that's not always necessarily a bad thing. It's fine to focus your activism on a single issue and to just worry about that. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. But if the point is that a lot of activist groups focus on their chosen issue and aren't necessarily worried about making Democratic candidates electable, I think that in many cases is a fair criticism. What about this next one? Reactionary rather than proactive. Democrats often let Republicans set the terms of cultural debates instead of clearly defining their own positions in a way that resonates with voters. I agree with that 100%. In fact, I agree with that so much. I think that's so right that it wipes out that bullshit that I read a second ago about how the far left is taking too firm a hand in defining the party. Earlier, though, here's the one I read. Allowing the far left to define the party. Number 7, activist groups and progressive staffers push unpopular cultural positions, making it seem like Democrats are more extreme than they actually are. It's not the far left that's doing that. At least not to the point that it is taking hold in the culture and in the media and in the broader conversation. If people say that the Democrats are Marxists and radical leftists and socialists and communists, that's not because far leftists are making people think that. Ask any far leftist. Nobody fucking listens to them. And I'm not saying that's a good thing, by the way. I'm just saying that's the way it is. The far left does not have a loud enough voice in this conversation. The far left in general, never mind individual groups on the far left, they do not have nearly the influence or the audience or the platform to define the Democratic Party the way they are being accused of defining it. And yet these people in this third way group think it's so important that they list that before they get to the real problem, which is Democrats letting Republicans set the terms. And they don't even name it after that. They don't say number 8, Republicans being allowed to define the Democratic Party. They don't call it that, even though that's what they're talking about. They say reactionary rather than proactive. They give it this vague headline instead of calling it what it is and calling it the actual problem. If the Democratic Party is being perceived as radical, for Christ's sake, the Democratic Party being perceived as radical, wouldn't that be nice? That's not the fault of progressives. That's the fault of Republicans. And that is absolutely true that Democrats let Republicans do that and get away with that. That is absolutely true. It's not the far left's fault. It's not the progressives' fault. It's Republicans that do that. It's Republicans that tell people Democrats are radicals. Democrats are communists. Democrats want to take away your guns. Democrats want to trans your kids. It's Republicans that say that, and then it's Democrats, and the Democrats who hold the bullhorns most of the time, who control the largest platforms, who actually run the party, like these moderates and centrists who just sit there silently and let the Republicans say it. So if you have a problem with Republicans defining Democrats, which you should if you're a Democrat, and you're one of the Democrats that actually has a significant amount of sway in the party, you do something about it. You should be doing something about it. You should have been doing something about it this whole time, instead of blaming progressives who have nothing to do with it. Moving on. Over-reliance on buzzwords and political correctness. Terms like pregnant people and Latinx alienate working-class voters who see them as out of touch with real-world terms and vocabulary. And number 10, finally, the last item on this list, lack of positive national identity message. Democrats focus too much on America's flaws, racism, sexism, inequality, without acknowledging the country's progress and potential, making them seem pessimistic and unpatriotic. Let's see what the third wave folks have to say in the rest of their document. Takeaways on why Democrats are not trusted by the working class, on the economy, vilification of wealth. Oh, the Democrats, they're vilifying wealth, making it seem like it's bad to be rich. Can't do that. No, it's terrible. And they definitely do that. Disconnected messaging. Democrats focus on broad economic indicators instead of acknowledging real struggles like high prices and stagnant wages. Are Democrats not talking about these things? I feel like Democrats talk about these things. No clear economic vision. Democrats lack a cohesive, inspiring economic agenda and often present a laundry list of policies rather than a unifying vision. Hey, you know what would be a really good unifying vision, especially in this day and age with the many challenges that we face economically and environmentally? How about the fucking Green New Deal? Oh, you don't like that though, do you? Centrists, moderates, we can't do that. Fuck, no, we can't. Green New Deal, are you crazy? We can't do that. Come up with something else. Over-prioritization of social issues. Have they not made this point 2 or 3 times already? We're not even on page 5 yet. We're only on page 2. Over-prioritization of social issues. Economic policy is often framed through the lens of identity politics rather than broad-based prosperity, making working-class voters feel overlooked. Just don't even talk about trans people. Just pretend they're not there. That'll make everybody happy, right? Let's just pretend the queer people aren't even there. Because being reminded that they are there, that's upsetting to working class people. Perceived government overreach. Voters see Democrats as favoring excessive regulations, inefficient spending, and programs that don't directly benefit them. Again, who's telling that story? Republicans. Who's telling people that Democrats are the excessive regulation party? The Democrats just want to regulate people out of business. The Democrats just want to tax businesses out of business. The Democrats are all about tax and spend and running up deficits. Who says that about the Democrats? Republicans. Does it say in here, in order to fix that perceived problem that Democrats are the party of government overreach, they should address and answer and correct that false narrative being perpetuated by Republicans? Does it say that? No, it doesn't. Failure to own mistakes. Democrats defend flawed policies and institutions instead of acknowledging failures and committing to reforms that would improve economic trust. So we're supposed to acknowledge and commit to reforming flawed institutions, but we're also supposed to love the police and not challenge the police. Because it says earlier, one of the problems is we challenge beloved institutions like the police, but then again, we fail to attempt to reform flawed institutions. So I guess implicitly the argument from these people is that policing in America does not constitute a flawed institution. Number 7. Republicans as the aspirational party. GOP messaging suggests they want voters to be rich, while Democrats are seen as focusing on redistribution rather than wealth creation. At least this time they say GOP messaging. Because a lot of these things are the result of GOP messaging, of the Republican Party spreading false narratives about the Democratic Party. At least in this one, randomly, They acknowledge that this is due to Republicans lying on Democrats. That it's GOP messaging saying that they are the party of making people rich and creating wealth, and it's those Democrats who want to steal money from the rich and redistribute it. Number 8, climate policy viewed as anti-growth. The emphasis on climate change is seen as harming job opportunities and economic growth, especially in working class communities. There you go. That's why we can't do the Green New Deal. Sorry. People don't like it. And apparently we can't educate them and inform them and explain them why it would be good, not only for, their continued existence as a species, but also economically. We just have to avoid talking about it. Climate policy is anti-growth. People don't like that. We need to de-emphasize that. As if the National Party could de-emphasize this stuff even more than it already. Why don't just re-register as Republicans, guys? Third way people, if this is the party that you want, it already exists. It's called the fucking Republican Party. The break room versus the boardroom. Democratic economic messages often come from elites, celebrities, and politicians rather than working class voices that voters can relate to. Okay, I can see that. I have no problem with empowering working class voices and letting them speak for the party and putting them front and center. I think that might actually be a good idea. There you go. There's another one. See, there's been a few things in here that haven't been fucking awful ideas. Number 10, failure to address economic anxiety. Are we talking about real economic anxiety or the name that they give to racism because they're not comfortable calling it racism? Voters believe Democrats care more about the very poor than the struggling middle class and fail to provide a clear path to economic security. Voters often believe they are wealthier than the people Democrats talk about. Democrats, they care too much about poor people. So in order to fix that, again, what? We need to just stop talking about poor people? As if we talk about them too much as it is? As if the Democratic Party, again, as an institution on a national level, as though what? They've been talking too much about people in poverty? Like, what party are you talking about? Moving on. Takeaways on how Democrats can reconnect culturally with the working class. Again, it's this group of people who went to a resort for a day and a half to talk amongst themselves who have come up with the solution. These people, the people who wrote this document, they know after talking to each other how the Democratic Party can reconnect with the working class. I cannot wait to hear what they have to say. Move away from identity politics. Of course. Of course. Stop talking about trans people. Stop talking about immigrants. Definitely stop talking about Palestinians. Don't ever talk about Palestinians, ever. Stop addressing voters as identity blocks and instead focus on shared American values like equality, maybe? Like justice? Use plain language and avoid jargon or abbreviations that can alienate viewers. Yeah. Again, we're trying to speak to people at like a first grade level. Acknowledge that people have multiple identities, e.g. black and a veteran, rather than reducing them to one label. Now again, I agree with this. In fact, you know what we should do in order to educate people about the fact that people have multiple identities? We should really focus on educating people about the real meaning of the concept intersectionality. Oh, wait, that's jargon. That's jargon, even though that might be an incredibly useful concept to inform people about. And it's exactly what is being talked about in that bullet point. But no, it's intersectionality, and it's academic. And academia is one of those elite institutions that we're not supposed to be in favor of anymore. So we can't. Sorry, I guess this is just an unsolvable problem. 2, emphasize shared values and cultural alignment. Frame rights as about freedom and justice. Well, there you go. That's what I was just saying. And equality. Or is that too lefty? Is equality too lefty? Might that scare some people? Highlight similarities between marginalized groups and mainstream American values. Again, this is not a bad idea. This is a good one. Embrace patriotism, community, and traditional American imagery, e.g. farms, main streets, places where the white people live. Rebalance the party's cultural messaging. Reject fringe positions that alienate the median voter. Sure, don't try to educate or inform the median voter about why focusing on certain positions that are wrongly regarded as fringe might be important. Just forget it. Just reject those positions. Even if they might be valid and important. Don't even talk about it. Fuck it. Don't even talk about it. Avoid overly moralistic or condescending messaging. Speak plainly and directly. How do you do both of those if you're talking about racism or transphobia or xenophobia against immigrants? How do you both speak plainly and directly and avoid sounding moralistic when you're talking about people who are racist or bigoted against queer people? Oh, I forgot we're not supposed to do that. We're supposed to avoid identity politics. Sorry. Allow candidates to express personal faith and values without fear of backlash. Who is attacking candidates for expressing personal faith? Unless they're using their faith as an excuse for their bigotry. Which apparently we're not supposed to talk about either. Because that's moralistic. You know what I appreciate the most about this? The clarity. Reduce far-left influence and infrastructure. Build a moderate democratic infrastructure. Yes, finally. Let's finally build a moderate Democratic Party infrastructure. Wouldn't it be about time? Aren't you so tired of the far-left Democratic Party? Aren't you just sick of it? I am. Oh boy. I can't wait for the Democratic Party to finally move to the center, push back against far-left staffers and groups that exert a disproportionate influence on policy and messaging. Who are they? Ban far-left candidate questionnaires and refuse to participate in forums that create ideological purity tests. Didn't they say that there was a fear of dissent within the party? Isn't that one of the problems they cited? How is this reducing fear of dissent within the party? They say we need to reduce fear of dissent within the party. We need to make this party more diverse. We need to stop censoring people and silencing people for having ideas that maybe don't agree with the ideas of other Democrats. Oh, and by the way, we also need to shut up the far leftists and the progressives. We need to freeze them out. And stop going to their forums and stop talking to them and stop letting them voice their ideas. See, when these third wave people, these centrists, when they say we need to reduce the fear of dissent in the party, they're just talking about themselves. And I cannot stress this enough. They are already the most influential group in the party. But it's not enough for them. How can you say within the same 5-page document that fear of dissent in the party is one of the major problems, is one of the top 10 problems with the party, and one of the top 10 reasons why the party doesn't connect with voters and didn't win the last election, and then in the same document, just a couple of pages later, suggest as a remedy for the party's troubles, kick out the far leftists. Engage with the working class in their spaces. Get out of elite circles and into real communities. E.g., tailgates, gun shows, local restaurants, and churches. Do Democrats who represent rural districts in Congress or who are senators in rural states, do they not do this already? Do Democrats who represent people who live in small communities, who have tailgate parties and gun shows and churches, do they not do this already? Do Democratic presidential candidates every 4 years not go to fucking churches and local restaurants enough? What are they talking about? Own the failures of Democratic governance in large cities and commit to improving local government. Just admit that the Republicans are right and there's too many immigrants and that the immigrants are responsible for all the violence and it's black people who are responsible for all the crime. Own your Democratic failures. Just admit that the Republicans were right. Show up in unfriendly media spaces and engage with voters outside traditional Democratic strongholds, but not leftists. Engage with people who aren't traditional Democratic voters, but as long as they're Republicans, not if they're progressives and Democrats. Fuck those people. Fuck those people. We need to serve the Republicans if we Democrats want to win elections. show up in unfriendly media spaces. So go on Joe Rogan. Go on Tucker Carlson. Travel to Moscow and let Tucker Carlson interview you. Improve democratic communication and media strategy. Now, this sounds promising. This, I think, is a good thing. This is something that they should be doing. Conduct a comprehensive study on media consumption to better understand how to reach voters, something that these people definitely did not do. Develop a stronger, more relatable democratic media presence. Podcasts, social media, sports broadcasting. Okay. Yeah, sure. This is not a bad idea. I'm not a big fan of the we need a leftist. Well, they wouldn't say leftist. I'm not a big fan of the we need a Democrat Joe Rogan. But in general, yes. Improved media presence, beefed up media presence, more democratic voices. I would say, foolishly, I'm sure in their eyes, more progressive voices in the media. Encourage candidates to be bold, engaging, and authentic in their messaging rather than overly polished. I agree with this 100%. I find it a little strange that this group of people is making that suggestion, but I agree with that 100%. Embrace moderation, individualism, and masculinity. That's another problem with they're too feminine. They're too feminine. You know what else? They're not saying this. But you know what? They're too fucking gay. You Democrats. That's why you're not winning elections on the national level. You're too fucking gay. And not gay in the lumberjack way either. Gay in the hairdresser way. That's your problem, Democrats. If you're going to be gay like Nick Offerman was in that Last of Us episode. Be gay like him, but not the gay parts. Reconnect with values like hard work, rugged individualism, and entrepreneurialism. Be more accepting of masculinity and male voters who feel alienated from the party. The masculine voters are alienated from the Democratic Party. Why won't they embrace my masculinity, say the really masculine people. Shift focus from progressive mission creep to core democratic issues that resonate broadly. What progressive mission creep? Where is the progressive? I would love for there to be some progressive mission creep in the Democratic Party. I've been yelling about it for years. Can we please start acting like a fucking progressive party? Please! But these people think that it's too progressive already. Can you fucking imagine? Revise democratic fundraising priorities. Move away from the dominance of small dollar donors whose preferences may not align with the broader electorate. We need to get us a whale. That's what we need. We need to get us a whale. Hey, I just watched that movie Nora. Maybe we can get one of those Russian whales. Yeah, it worked out so good for the Republicans. Give candidates and campaigns more flexibility in how they spend funds without excessive donor constraints. So give candidates more flexibility in how they spend the funds, but also get more of the funds from large dollar donors who are more likely to have strings attached for how they want the money spent. Okay, sure. Again, I love the clarity in this. Takeaways on how Democrats can rebuild economic trust with working class voters. Acknowledge struggles and speak to real concerns, as long as they're not the concerns of queer people or immigrants or black people or anybody else who could be considered marginalized, because that's identity politics, and we have to avoid that at all costs. Recognize that while the economy may be improving broadly, many families are still struggling. Avoid dismissing economic anxieties. Don't call racist people racist if they lie and say that it's because of economic anxiety. Just accept that at face value, because you don't want to alienate those people. Speak directly to the concerns of working class voters with tangible solutions. As progressives, we all discussed among our friends and family how expensive things were, but politically only wanted to talk about how much better things are getting. As progressives, shift messaging away from handouts. What messaging? Since when? Democrats don't call them handouts. Progressives don't call them handouts. But they're not saying change the terminology. Here, pay attention to this. They're not suggesting stop calling them handouts, change the messaging, change the narrative, challenge the story being told about you by Republicans. They're not saying that. Here's what they're saying. Many working class voters reject policies seen as giveaways, e.g. student loan forgiveness, universal basic income. So just fuck that. People don't like student loan forgiveness, so just don't worry about it. Just don't do it. People don't like it. Except the people whose student loans could be forgiven, but fuck them, fuck those people, fuck them. Frame policies around opportunity, empowerment, and work rather than redistribution. I think the fact that you, as a Democratic Party group, keep using the term redistribution in a pejorative way, it might be part of the problem. I don't know. Small language shifts matter. Focus on better wages instead of minimum wage. Okay, I'll go along with that one. That seems reasonable. I agree. Rhetoric matters. Prioritize simple, tangible policies. Advocate for middle-class tax cuts. Support public education and propose spending cuts where needed. I agree with that. Absolutely. Hey, how about also advocate for raising taxes on rich people to pay for much-needed social programs, which would hurt nobody, would hurt literally nobody, because rich people can afford to have their taxes jacked way the fuck up from where they are now, and it would actually help a lot of people, because the programs that would be funded by that are desperately needed by people in need in the country. That seems rather simple, right? Isn't that simple and tangible? Or is that too progressive? Is that not centrist and moderate enough? Ensure policies are easy to understand and feel relevant to daily life. Well, like I just did. Except maybe not, because that would actually help people who need help. And also, you know who else it would help? It would probably help some of the very, very poor. And I guess we're not supposed to focus on that, because that alienates people who have more money. Integrate and engage with the business community. Yes. Yes. Pro-business. That's the ticket. Democrats need to stop demonizing wealth and corporations broadly. When do Democrats demonize wealth? When do they do that? Like, when do they actually do that? Now, they do things that, again, and I say this for the 15,000th time in this video, they advocate for policies that are inaccurately described as demonizing wealth by Republicans. But do Democrats actually demonize wealth? I don't think so. There are some people on the far left who have a problem with, and not just people on the far left, a lot of people just on the left, broadly speaking, that have a problem with people who are hoarding their wealth, who are not just millionaires and not even just billionaires, but have tens of billions or hundreds of billions of dollars. They might have a problem with that on a moral basis when we live in a country where there are people living in poverty, where there are people who are starving, where there are people who don't have access to health care or education or do have student loan payments that they can't afford to pay. And we have people in this country who control hundreds of billions of dollars in assets. And oh, God forbid the Democrats express any kind of qualm, any kind of objection, any kind of worry about that situation. Don't demonize wealth. Don't you dare demonize wealth by saying that maybe we should tax the multi-billionaires in this country a little more, so we have a little bit more to spend on the people who have nothing. Don't demonize wealth. Engage with small businesses, business podcasts like Earn Your Leisure that reach the aspiring class, and entrepreneurs to discuss economic policies, and maybe also, reach out to people who can afford to spend multiple days at resorts brainstorming about political policy. Be pro-aspiration and pro-capitalism in a smart way. Recognize that working class voters value upward mobility and economic success. Have a prosperity gospel aimed at the working class. What? Rhetoric matters, right? Tiny language changes matter, right? Prosperity gospel. Are we sure that these people don't want to just be Republicans? Call out corporate abuses individually instead of attacking corporations as a whole. You know how fucking long that'll take? What about efficient messaging? We call out corporations as a whole because they're all fucking doing some of this shit. You want to call out every single one? That'll take all day. Reform government and address inefficiencies. Take government complaints seriously and commit to improving its efficiency. Push for systemic reforms rather than just defending the status quo. I agree with this. Maybe you should start. You first. Push for systemic reforms rather than just defending the status quo, except apparently when it comes to the fucking police. Center every conversation on the economy because it worked so well for Bernie Sanders, didn't it? Who, by the way, you probably don't like very much in the first place, do you? Bernie Sanders, who lost 2 presidential elections by trying to make every fucking thing about the economy, but who I am positive is also way too progressive and way too far left for these assholes. Lead with economic messaging in speeches, ads, and policy proposals. Avoid leading with cultural issues. Focus on jobs, wages, and cost of living concerns, because everything else is just a boutique issue, right? Racial inequality, racial injustice, police brutality, persecution of gay people and trans people and Jewish people and Palestinian people and just Muslim people in general, persecution of immigrants, cultural issues, boutique issues, climate change, severe weather events, economic issues. That's what you have to focus on, economic issues. Not those cultural issues that nobody cares about, that don't really affect people's lives. Because only economic issues affect people's lives and can be explained and pitched to voters in a way where they realize the effect that it has on their lives. And a lot of people don't realize this. You can only do that with economic issues. You can't message about cultural issues in a way that makes them feel relevant to people's lives. You just can't do it. It's impossible. Engage rural and non-college voters. Show up in rural communities and places where Democrats are unpopular. Again, do Democrats not already do this? I'm saying, look, if you're saying they should do it more or they should get better at it, I agree 100%. But are we implying that they're not doing this already? Listen to non-college voters without judgment, making their concerns central to policy conversations. Don't judge these people who didn't go to college. Like the people who wrote this document definitely aren't. Embrace populism thoughtfully. Critique corporate excess and corruption, but avoid an anti-capitalist stance. What counts as anti-capitalism? Critiquing corporate excess too much. Just critique it a little bit. Just a little bit. Don't critique it so much that the wealthy capitalists and corporations that we want to donate to our party instead of the small dollar donors will give up on us and not want to give us money. That's the sweet spot right there. And number 10, finally, showcase working class voices and candidates. Recruit candidates who come from working class backgrounds and have relatable life experiences. Use messengers that working class voters trust. Business leaders, because working class voters always implicitly trust business leaders. If there's one group that is universally popular and trusted among working class people, it's business leaders. They love them. Skilled laborers and community figures. Thank you for being so specific. So there you go. That's the 5-page document put together by Third Way to propose how the Democratic Party can turn this whole thing around. And apparently the answer is to become even more like the Republican Party, because it's worked so well for the last 30 years. Moving to the center, moving to the right, it's always worked, hasn't it? I'm not saying I have all the answers. God knows. God knows. I do not have all the answers, or probably even any of the answers. But I am smart enough to know that most of the answers are not in these 5 pages. There are a few good ideas, as I've tried to point out as we went through this. There are a few good ideas. But there's a lot of shit in here that is placing the blame, that is identifying legitimate problems, like the way the party is perceived, but placing the blame on the wrong people. Somehow blaming progressives for shit that Republicans falsely or exaggeratedly say about us. Now, I agree we need to be better at messaging. I agree we need to be better at telling our story, at our narrative, and I definitely agree that Democrats need to stop acting like fucking cowards and stop reacting to things and start making things happen. You know who's my fucking hero this week? Al Green. Because he stood up during Trump's not a State of the Union speech on Tuesday, and he didn't sit down and he didn't shut up and he made them drag his ass out of there. He's my fucking hero. Did he really accomplish anything? No, it was all symbolic. But at least he did something. At least he did that. He stood up and he raised his voice and he made them listen to him, and he didn't stop. He forced them to drag him out. It was an act of protest. And he's a goddamn hero for doing it. And I admire him and I applaud him for doing it. You know who I don't admire? You know who I don't applaud? Every single motherfucker in that chamber who just sat there and watched. Why wasn't every Democrat out of their seat joining in? When that sergeant at arms came in to take him out, why wasn't every single Democrat out of their seat yelling and hollering and doing the exact same thing? Why didn't they say, you know what? Throw us all out. If you're going to throw him out, throw the rest of us out too. But most of them just sat there and waited for it to be over. Oh, please let it be over soon. Or they held up little Roadrunner signs. And that's cute. And that's clever. But that's not enough. That's not enough. And neither is this shit. Especially when it places the blame on the progressives and the leftists in the party, instead of on the Republicans, who have shifted the narrative and have done so because people like these guys, moderates and centrists who run the party, have allowed them to. So yeah, let's correct the messaging. Absolutely. We progressives, we absolutely need to do that. We need to be better and more effective and stronger at crafting compelling, simple, easy to understand, but accurate and informative and educational messaging to people, to let people know what we want to do, why what we want to do is good for them, and why they should support it and they should help us get it done. We absolutely need to get better at that. But how is that ever going to happen if the suggestion of this group is taken and progressives are silenced and marginalized in the party even more than they are now? This is not a serious call, despite the good suggestions in here. This is not a serious call to reform and improve the Democratic Party. This is a call to put people like this in charge. And it's fucking redundant because they already are. And look where we are as a result.